All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Let folks get in here. Um, my name is Matthew Kiesner. I am an instructional designer here at Opperuth, and I do a good bit of SSAT and ISEE. So we'll be talking about understanding both these tests and the quirks of them, and how to help how to best support your student with either of these tests. We've got a Q&A. So if you have any questions there, feel free to throw that on, and I'll see them pop up, and we'll have to get to those as we go through. So just to start off with Alpha with our why, we believe that if you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives. And we work on academic tutoring, test prep, which was going to be the main topic of the day, and then executive function coaching, helping students with planning and life skills. So we're going to talk about the understanding, the SSAT and ISEE for this current 2023-2024 school year. We'll start with the SSAT, then we'll move on to the ISEE. We'll get to look at how these test schools use these things, and looking at a testing timeline and a study plan. So I guess the question is, which one should your student take? And really, it depends on the schools you're applying to. Some regions are going to be exclusively one or the other. Some regions have a mix. And so I can't tell you that it's very rare for a lot of students to have the opportunity to do one or the other. It's usually that a school is, they only do the SSAT and they only do the ISEE, and they, unlike the comparison with like SAT or ACT for colleges, where you have like pretty much universal compliance, where every college will accept either SAT or ACT. On the private schools, they are really kind of locked into one or the other. So depending on what kind of schools you're applying to, a student may have to take both, which I think is going to be more uncommon, and that might be more of an issue if you're looking for private boarding schools or things, or that at that kind of caliber. But yeah, definitely check your admissions page. They'll say pretty clearly what the expectations are for the admissions. So we'll start with the SSAT. So there are 3 levels there. There's elementary, middle, and upper. We're not going to spend too much time on elementary. It is not used widely on there, but we'll be mostly focusing on the middle and upper. I think I do have one elementary slide. So SSAT is run by the EMA, Enrollment Management Association. They also do some kind of common app stuff, and they are not affiliated with the SAT or the College Board. There are obviously some similarities to the tests, but really at this point, especially all the changes with the SAT has gone over in the last 15 years, the SSAT it's very much its own thing. So the SSAT will have there are 4 different options that students can take, and this is definitely, as tests go, on the more confusing side of things. So it's good to kind of know all these options. So there's an at-home, which is a student takes it at home on their desktop using a secure online proctor. There is also testing at Prometric, which is a computer-based test at a Prometric Testing Center. There is the Flex and Benchmark tests, and that are like kind of tests on demand. And then there's also going to, starting in October, monthly paper-based testing at select locations, usually at SSAT affiliate schools. So I've got slides to kind of cover all these things and sort of the differences on those. So the SAT is offered like pretty much every Saturday, and then at least one Sunday per month. And there's also multiple start times, which can be good if you have a student who really doesn't like mornings. If they're on the East Coast, they might be able to test at noon or even like 2 p.m. on there. So the other tests are going to probably be the typical 9 a.m. start time. And you can see the availability for these dates on the SSAT.org site. You can filter by types of test and different dates. So the test is using this PSI secure browser. You have to download it beforehand, make sure that it works. It will restrict other things. You cannot leave the browser when you're in the testing format. You obviously can't pull up the calculator or go and use Google to check uh, a the definition of a word or something. So they make sure you don't have that set up before the test. So during the test, you can have 2 sheets of paper and pencils and a water bottle, so for a student can still write down math on a piece of paper. They're going to do a room check, and obviously make sure that the student's desk is has no other devices on it, and so they may kind of do a little bit of a scan of there. And students are going to have to be on camera during this process and during the test. Parents can be in the room check, and I would highly recommend it because I think it's kind of strange for for someone on the internet to go into a student's room and like ask to look around. To me, it feels a little bit weird. So it's something to I would definitely suggest all parents be around and to help proctor that part. So there is definitely like the at-home test is they are looking at security. They are using eye tracking software. I've had students test where they looked up and then they were just saying that they were just thinking about their answer, and that the eye tracker software says if you basically look here or you can look down at your paper. There's also the cameras on and the microphone, and so they hear any kind of noises and stuff. There are people live proctors monitoring the student's experience. So otherwise the test is the same as at the paper test, same structure, same amount of questions. It's just online. The only difference is that students can choose to skip to finish a section, and this can be bad. I've had students who are 5th graders, so like 10, take the at-home test, and this test takes about 3 hours, and I had a student finish it like in 45 minutes because he's just like, I did as much as I could do. I'm going to move on, and obviously that testing administration didn't go great for him. Excuse me. So making sure that a student knows, hey, once you stop that section, you cannot go backwards. And I think especially for some of the younger students, that's a lot of responsibility for them. If you want to try it, the SSAT does have like a online practice test that can be purchased as part of their online curriculum, and it's the exact same interface on there. There's really not a lot of features in it. It's there's no highlighting, there's no note taking, you can't draw. It's just really clicking on answers and not much else beyond that. Good news is that the scores do come back quickly on the SSAT at home, about 4 business days. It will not be graded immediately. And then there's Prometric. So the Prometric sites are all over. I did a search, and there was one like 3 miles from my house. And they're used a lot for testing for like graduate school tests. You may have taken the GRE or MCAT at one of these places. But they're basically they're quiet areas with little cubicles and computers to test on. So they will have it in there. Maybe the preference on there is it is a distraction-free environment. If you have other kids or pets in the house, and you're doing this on Saturday, it may be difficult to block off the space for the student who needs a test. And you also have to worry about internet connectivity or downloading the software or anything. You just walk in and take the test. It's important to recognize that there is a limit on testing, and so students can take 2 SSATs on computer based, and that's including the at home and the Prometric. You can do it twice per year. Previously, it had been, I think, 6 times during the pandemic, and they've cut that down, pretty dramatically. I think probably to have to create fewer test forms. But that's the know that it's not like an infinite option. So there's also the flex test. So flex test is a paper test, and it's called that because it's flexible scheduling. Students can take the flex test once per year. Last year they did like a seasonal flex test where it was like pre-Thanksgiving, post-Thanksgiving. They've gone back to just having just one per year. And so it needs to be administered typically by a counselor or consultant and on there. And some schools will do a flex test as well. Do know that there may you may have to purchase the test, but and also pay for the proctor time of the consultant. So they know that can be kind of difficult. If you're not sure who to find for that, they actually have, you can look on their website and look up providers in different regions. And there's also benchmark tests. This is something where a school books it. Sometimes it's for students who are like, if it's a K through 12 school, maybe eighth graders take it, and then they compare the scores of the eighth graders they have to the eighth graders coming in. But if you're at a school where they're offering it, you should take it, right? It's a free SSAT on there. But that's only something that a counselor in a school can do. And then we have our standard test dates. They're going to start in October, and they're typically the second Saturday, though not exclusively. And they're going to be offered throughout the school year, though really a lot of the testing needs to be done by the February test. So that's sort of the latest on there. The exception is this elementary level. Elementary level is not widely used. It is 2 separate tests, one for third graders, one for fourth graders. They do not allow any at home or prometric testing. It's only in paper. And students can take it twice in person. And then also they do have a flex test option on there. But a lot of schools don't use it. I know here in Atlanta, there's a JATP test that's used. There's not any of these things. It's more of a psych eval that you really shouldn't prepare for because they actually, it's like a one-on-one conversation with a student and an administrator. But we're mostly going to focus on the middle and upper level, and because that seems to be where most students and families are interested in SSAT. So we got the test structure. So it's going to start off with an essay. That essay is unscored and 25 minutes, which is not a lot of time to plan and write an essay. Then there's going to be quantitative, and that's just math. You got 30 minutes to do 25 questions. Then there's going to be reading comprehension. There's going to be passages. I've got slides for you to get into the specifics on here. It's just the comprehension, and then we got verbal. That is it's going to first start with synonyms and then analogies. And so 60 questions, 30 minutes. But these are short questions. They're not going to take too long to answer. And then an additional quantitative section that's not really different than the first. And then they do ask students to do a experimental section that's unscored. That is a mix of different types of questions. So we'll go through the kind of the sections and some strategies for that. So there is that 25-minute essay. Students can give 2 prompts. So if it's a middle level student, which is for students that are in 5th through 7th, that is going to one's going to be a narrative prompt, which is like basically the first line of a story. The other one's a personal, like it's something that they describe an experience that happened to them. For the upper level, one prompt is that similar kind of personal one. The other one's analytical, which is like like what's the best quality a school should have, something like that. And so they are not scored, but they are sent to schools for evaluation. So they're seeing, the school might ask for additional essays, that knowing that a student can prep and take time and have multiple drafts, and also know that there likely could be parent or counselor involvement. They may look at and compare the essays, and if the essay during the SAT is of really poor quality, that might show that the other essay may not be authentic. And they're also, I think they're looking at it kind of as as an unofficial psych eval to kind of learn the student's personality. Given free range, do they write something cohesive and positive, or do they write something troubling or weird? And they I would always tell my students, like this is part of your first impression. You can't write something that's like too odd or anything. So for the SSAT math, which they call the quantitative, so calculators are not permitted on the SSAT, with the only exception if a student has an accommodation for a calculator. But I would say that the arithmetic is not terribly intense on this test, but it's something that you do have to pay attention to. It's good to test logical reasoning and problem solving abilities, and they're both levels of middle and upper are going to have some arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. Upper is going to have some more advanced concepts going well into algebra 1. with dealing with linear equations, fractional negative exponents, a little bit of polynomial factoring, and stuff like that. It's just, testing. Do you kind of know what to do with a binomial? Nothing too intense. So good strategies for this, is read carefully. A lot of the questions are going to be word problems, and this is definitely a test where lengthy word problems is going to be norm. Where there's like it'll take multiple sentences to extract the information. Obviously, write down your work. Don't skip steps. If you're having to divide, use long division. If you're having to add fractions, make sure that you change the denominators, do it correctly, and then always double check that you answer the question that was asked. This is something where the wrong answers on math are oftentimes things that are also true, and so you want to make sure that you're seeing it as in that way where what they might ask you the value of x, but you found the value of y, or that they wanted the area of the circle, and you answered the circumference, which is the circumference would also be one of the wrong answers. It's that kind of thinking. And so a couple example problems here. So a circle has an area of 16 inches, 16 pi inches. What is the length of inches in diameter? They do not give any sort of formula help, and so here you have to know that it's pi r squared equals area, and then you plug in 16 pi for area. Solve for r, you would get 4. And then a lot of times we'll pick a, but again, it's that last thing. It's asking for the diameter. You also have to know that the diameter is double the radius, and so the actual answer would be C on there. And so you're they're definitely thinking about little trap answers. And they're also going to test on some guesstimation stuff. So we have a gross looking division here, but it's asking for what's closest. And if we look at the answer choices, we can see that these are actually they're nowhere near each other. And so what we can do is we can just sort of round this right to 60,000 over 2,000. If you write it this way, we can use the rule of crossing out zeros, and so we can cross out 3 zeros, which then leaves us with 60 over 2, which is 30. I will definitely see a lot of students spend a lot of time trying to do this correctly, and so part of it is kind of teaching students to hey, there's usually an easy way to do the math on the SSAT. The challenge is that you're trying to figure out the most clever way to do it, and that's I think really where a lot of the concern is on that. So on the reading is going to be about 7 or 8 passages, about 5 or 6 questions per passage. The passages are not too long. They're probably 20 lines, maybe a couple paragraphs. It's going to be all kinds of different texts. It's going to be some narrative, including a lot of old-fashioned, older passages, stuff from the Victorian era, expository, persuasive essays, poetry can show up. There's definitely they don't give you any clue to what the passages are about. So they won't say this is this is from this Charles Dickens story. You'll just start reading it, and you won't have any of that context. Questions, a lot of things about inference, and then they also like to ask you about author's tone, because one of that does is allows them to test vocabulary in a different way. So best thing on the reading is read carefully and actively. If you're doing the paper test, I would highly recommend underlining things and taking some notes. If you are taking the test online, you still have paper to write a little summary. So the best way to answer questions is it's easier to use process elimination and find the non-supported words and then eliminate those answers. And then getting comfortable with adjectives that show tone is definitely useful. Knowing that what an objective tone is shows up a lot. And then they also do tests on some figurative language, so knowing that words like metaphor, personification, synecdoche. They will ask you on line 7 as an example of in that quote or something. So on the verbal section, there's going to be 30 synonym questions and 30 analogy questions. They're both going to go easy to hard on there. So know that if a student's struggling at like the end of the synonym questions, you can move on to the first couple analogies should be pretty easy. Synonym questions have no context; it's just a word, and you need to find the most direct synonym. They do oftentimes use like words with multiple meanings. And so there might be a less word. So I was working with a student, the word was spirit, and like you might think ghost or something, but it was actually mood. Like to have like a spirit, uh, how you feel on something, right? And then analogies are relationships between words, and so these are going to be like good as to bad as, and then something something like that. So on verbal here, so we have the word objective, which I mentioned earlier. Objective has lots of meanings, but if you look at the answer choices, they're being used as an adjective, and so the objective as an adjective is the opposite of subjective, which means that it's something that is fact-based and not opinionated, and so neutral would be the best answer. You can see a student misunderstanding that and saying objective is like thinking of how you would shout like in court or something, and that'd be offensive, right? To object to something. And then we have bias is actually the antonym. And then for analogies, we have concerned as to frantic. This is a classic analogy, and these are not synonyms, but they're looking at order where frantic is more extreme than concerned. So you want to create a sentence, and so it'd be frantic is greater than concerned, and it's okay. You can take the second word and flip it around as long as you keep it that way, right? So is balmy more than frigid? No, not really. Is perturbed more than furious? No. Is elated more than content? Yeah, that seems elated stuff. They're both fairly positive. Is perplexed more than sad? No real relationship there. Is reserved more than ecstatic? No. So the answer would be C. And just kind of finish up the external section here is, it's going to be questions for all things. Students can't opt out. It's not scored. It's basically forcing the students to, to give some feedback to the SSAT test writers. As soon as ask, well, do I have to do it? I'm like, well, you're going to sit there for 15 minutes, either way. So you got to figure that out. All right, so we get into the scoring. The scoring is a little weird on the SSAT. So there is some things for scale scores. So the middle level and upper level are a little bit different. It's the middle levels is pushed back 30 points. So note that like especially the upper level, because it does go up to 800. It's easy to get into SAT thinking. And you see out of 800, I mean, that's similar to the SAT test. Again, these tests are different. And more importantly, the SAT test actually has a range from 200 to 800. So like a 550 on the SAT is like a very average score, and college bound, but probably not top tier university, but like definitely if you get to 550, you can get into a selective college of some level. But on the upper level or middle level SSAT, that's a very poor score, and something that's like one of the lowest scores you would see, right? So you have to kind of adjust expectations on there. The also SSAT doesn't go in tens. They kind of so the score might be 592 or something. So SSAT is, I think, maybe the only test that still exists that still has a guessing penalty. Pretty much all the other tests have eliminated them. APs did, SAT did. The SAT subject tests are no longer with us. So if a student makes a wrong answer, they can lose a quarter point off their score. So one of the first things I do when I work with a student is I talk about strategic answering, and if you don't know, it's better to leave it blank, and then get into, okay, can you eliminate some answers, and then as it becomes as you can eliminate some answers, then it makes more sense to to guess. So there are these scale scores, but they are going to get percentiles, and the percentiles are really what matters to schools. Um, but I have a lot of students and a lot of families when they take that first SSAT as maybe as a practice test, or maybe it's December and they're coming into this process late, and they took the November test without any prep, and they were just like, because they're, the perception of my student is, um, does great in school and stuff, and they, gets all A's, and then they take this and they get in the 40th percentile and they freak out. Hopefully this won't happen. Thank you all for being here in September versus, later in the year. So one thing is that the percentiles only represent students who are taking this test. It's not a nationwide ranking. So public school kids aren't taking it. K through 12 private school kids aren't taking it. And these days, the kids that are taking it are going to be highly motivated and like highly skilled students. And also, this is a test where like you're supposed to get to the 50th percentile. It is designed so with the content so that it'd be very difficult for to get a 99th percentile. And quite honestly, that's not what school, I mean, basically any school expects. There might be some, bizarre exception, but for the most part, that's not going to be the case. So it's also recommended that this test is like, it is an old school test. It's a 20th century IQ test, and it's testing things that aren't necessarily in school. And the material goes beyond grade level for any of these, because they're trying to like, to show the student who is exceptional, right, on these things. But do recognize that like a lot of times these percentiles could be surprising at first for a lot of families. So the schools will very rarely, if ever, post percentiles and cutoffs on there. And the reason is that if you think about like a big college, they're going to let in like X number of students from any from any school that applies, especially like a big state school, right? University of the state. And they're doing a volume business. That's not really true for any these private schools. They have a much smaller population, and so think of it as more like there's like a puzzle, and they're looking for individuals that will fit in certain pieces. So they're gonna look for the students who are athletes, musicians, actors. Are you interested in engineering? Are you interested in debate? And they're looking for for something, because obviously if they just say, oh, you have to be 95th percentile or above, they may not have a football team anymore, right? Or they have a thing where it's the school's so miserable that like no one wants to go there, right? So it's important to think about it as like, where does your student fit into this? That if you look at this in terms of like, is your student going to be 3-sport athlete? Is your student going to be in all the musicals? Is your student going to be in the marching band, right? All these are all things that like that schools need, right? And so thinking about like that, where that puzzle piece on there, the student who is like really strong in academics and really good at testing is another piece, right? On there, but it's only one factor, right? And what I tell families is that like, you're not going to become a star athlete in 3 months, right? You're not going to master the cello and become first chair in 3 months. But of all the things you can do, the SSAT is like the one where you can actually change. Like you can improve in a matter of months, and that's like really one of the metrics that you can put some work into. So I hope that they can understand sort of the complexity of that, because I know that a lot of families want what, like, I need this score to get in, and we're going to use some general estimates of this, knowing, okay, this this school's we're looking for a higher percentile than this other school, but I think even that's relative, right? And no school is going to say, oh, if you get this certain level, you will get in. So she has a study plan. So make sure like the SSAT does fill up fairly quickly. So make sure that you know like testing timeline and think about that. Um, what kind of test you're gonna take. I would say that now that the pandemic has waned, I would probably lean more towards paper testing, just because I've had some students have some difficulty with that home, where they're like they rush the test, or just having some technical errors, and like the start of the test being delayed an hour or something. Those things have definitely happened. Um, make sure that students do familiar with the test format. Best thing to do is you take a practice test on there. If it's a computer-based test, make sure you know the rules. And if you have to do computer-based testing, just like what you can and cannot do. If a student is fidgety, that might be a more difficult test, because like keeping on camera is important. For favorite testing, I've said I find sometimes they don't do bubbling in schools of like a Scantron, and so doing some practice on that. Things you wouldn't even think of, because especially if they do a lot of online assessments or something. The idea of just you're making your little circles with your number two pencil might be a little more challenging than I think a lot of us may realize. Definitely understand the guessing penalty, and then understand that it's okay to leave stuff blank. This is not a test where you're supposed to get every question right. In fact, a student can do quite well and still like have some blanks or missed questions on there. I would definitely plan to test more than once. I think for a lot of students, this is gonna be the first time they've done like a high stakes testing. They really can change their future. And that's a lot of anxiety, and that's a lot of pressure, especially when we're dealing with if you're dealing with a fifth grader. They've probably never been in that kind of experience where that their choices are really going to affect their future. And so I recognize that that's going to create a lot of anxiety. And so knowing the second time is going to always be easier, it's going to feel like you're not going to have all the nerves of the first time, and the uncertainty of that. And you really want to try to finish up tests at the end of January. There really is like you can do the beginning of February as a sort of last minute test. I mean, admittedly, they do have a testing all the way until June, but that would be those are very rare, and it would be something where it would kind of be like a wait list situation where hey, if you can get your score up a little bit, we might consider it, or you were rejected from a school and then they're like, actually we do have an opening, but you need to test. Like it's that kind of situation. It's not the norm. So I do recommend the kind of slow and steady approach, especially for reading and vocabulary. It's hard to kind of gain those skills. So it's good that you're here now. I would honestly recommend that now is the time just like to start to start the process. For testing in November, December. They're the students who just like this test comes naturally to them are few and far between. And it's one thing I found with my students. They're either like I can kind of put them in the right direction, and then like they'll start clicking and they go with it, and it's like usually it's not that hard of a process, or it's the exact opposite, and they like this is the logic of the test really is something they struggle with. Vocabulary is really essential in SSAT. Like knowing obscure words, knowing roots, and that kind of thinking. So obviously reading older books and is something to be helpful. And then keeping a review on math. I would say that like if the middle level test, it's that understanding fractions, decimals, percentages, ratios, and probability are all kind of the same thing, and the play in between those is important. On the upper level, it's getting into a foundation of geometry. It's getting into the basics of algebra one on there. But if the geometry does show up in both, and you do need to know all those formulas, so they give no help on that. So briefly, I want to talk about this other thing they have. It's just the character skill snapshot. Some of his families asked about this. This is like a little add-on. So if you buy the test, you also can take this character skill snapshot. Whether a school wants the student to take it, it really depends on the school. This is it. You just go and log in, and I think it's supposed to take a half hour. You don't have to go in any kind of like security things. You really can't cheat on it. It's meant to kind of, show character traits and kind of be a little like informal psych eval. All right, so you see these ideas on there. They're the character traits, and they are given like they're not given a numerical score, but they are given kind of put in three categories, which is emerging, developing, demonstrating. I think they're using very kind language here because you can't see like lacking on any of these things. And there's two kinds of questions: forced choice and situational judgment. And there's not really a right or wrong answer, but definitely certain like certain answers will push other categories. So the forced choice one is where you basically have to what you agree with and what you least agree with. I think this one is like the really none of these are like I don't know like the sociopath's answer or anything. So I don't think you have to you have to really worry about selecting on there, but they're just like different ways of approaching social interactions. And then the situational judgment here is where here like the student notices that the history test has the wrong date, and how should you handle it? I mean, I think answer choice A is pretty bad, like blurting, but there's nothing where storm out or refuse to take the test or something. We're just, but whether you should take this thing or your students take it, I don't know. I would ask the schools if it's something that they care about. But there's no additional charge. Like you buy the SSAT, you have an account, you can just take this test. All right, so now we're going to move on to the ISEE. So this is a different test, used in different schools. It has 3 levels: lower, middle, and upper. The difference is that if a kid's currently in 5th grade, they would take the middle SSAT, but they're going to take the lower ISEE. Otherwise, they're pretty much identical in terms of like how the organization there. So it's schools that are affiliated to ERB. And then some places are going to be more popular than others. So they're going to be offering, and this should really say 23-24. I need to update that. But there's an IC at home. There's their own little thing. There's the prometric, and then there's paper-based testing. So there are fewer ways to take the IC in a lot of regards. All right, so they're going to be using this ProProctor thing. You get a link. You got to download the it's in device. A lot of this is a little bit redundant with the SSAT. Here you get 2 sheets of paper, 2 pencils, and you don't get water, but you get 2 tissues. Use at your own discretion. They're gonna do a room check, and they even say that they'll check sleeves and glasses and stuff. I highly recommend parents being in there because that is just weird otherwise. They're gonna the same thing as the SSAT. Heavily use. They're gonna be on camera and be screened on stuff. Same structure as the regular test. It's just going to eat or drink during the break, and will probably have to do a security check when they come back in. Making sure they had like grabbed a calculator or something. The score will be back about 10 to 14 days, which is not really any faster than the regular ISE. So there's no advantage there because the paper-based SSAT takes about 2 weeks, where if you do the digital, you get it like in 4 days. So then there's also the prometric, same thing. I think these slides are kind of same as SSAT, right? You get you don't have to worry about the computer, and it's a distraction for test device. So for the paper-based testing, all right, one thing to know is the ISE does not have nationwide test dates. So you have to search for them, and they're given at certain times at affiliate schools. And depending on where you are, there might only be a few options for testing in terms of the dates you can take them. So if you're looking for the ISE, you definitely want to make sure they start making that game plan on there. So we'll look at some strategies here. The test structure is different. I'm going to focus on the middle and upper. The lower level is shorter. But so this one starts with verbal. Then we have quantitative, which is one version of math. Then reading comprehension. Then math achievement, which is a different section than quantitative. We'll get into the differences there. And then it finishes with an essay. So the verbal is going to be 20 multiple choice synonyms, and then 20 sentence completions. And those are like they used to be on the SAT where it's a sentence and a blank, and you have to use logic. So there's no analogy or analogies like there is on the SSAT. I would say that the level of vocab on the ISE is easier than the SSAT. And so, these I think are easier than some of the other stuff we saw. So for the math, there's going to be 20 multiple choice questions, focusing on kind of on logic and analysis. And then there's going to be some 17 quantitative reasoning questions, and like the GRE still has these. This is where like there's two quantities, and then you say it says you can say A is greater, B is greater, they are equal, or you cannot be determined. And then a calculator is not permitted on any of the ISE math. So here we have like on the quantitative you might see. So they're using these symbols to create function notation, and so that this is defined. And so they're seeing, can a student see that the A matches on these parts? You put the 4 in, and then then do order of operations on there to find the value. And then here we have a word problem about data and understanding what the understanding what range means, and then kind of following the rules of that. And so here's what the quantitative reasoning says. So these are always the 4 answer choices. They're standard. And so variables can be all real numbers. So like thinking about it as a positive, negatives, fractions and zero, like all the differences on there can really be important. So we see this like, it can be really simple stuff. So what's greater, x squared, x cubed? Some students are gonna go, oh, column B, because it's, cubing is bigger than squaring. But what if x is negative? Because squaring negative numbers become positive, cubing negative numbers stay negative, right? Or what if x is 0, right? Then they would be equal, or x is 1, right? And so like thinking about that this one would definitely be D, cannot be determined. And then the next one here would be like, you got some, a word problem dealing with definitions of geometry on there, which we can skip on that one. It's too late for geometry. Reading passages, like it's 6 passages, 6 questions each. They're basically expository and they're written contemporary. Narrative passages are pretty uncommon on this test. Questions are about structure and purpose, and they have a lot of questions on main idea. You should expect that question pretty much every time. So the same thing, read actively, summarize stuff, find throwaways. They'll ask more vocab and context questions, like what does this word mean? Definitely go back and look at that. They also do play with not accept questions. So that the passage mentions all as a cause of pollution except. And so those can be a little more tricky on there. But I would say that all in all, the reading on the ISEE is pretty easy, pretty straightforward, especially compared to the SSAT. The SSAT, throws all these random passages and asks some pretty tough questions. ISEE is really like it's reading comprehension. It's not all that challenging. But what is challenging is the math achievement. So that second math section is different in the question types. So it's 47 questions, and it's going to go way beyond grade level. They're really trying to see if a student can, it is beyond a grade level. So the 8th grade one can, you can see trigonometry in there, matrices, advanced probability, maybe some quadratics that is like would be challenging to most 8th graders on there. So there's definitely like, they're trying to weed out students' ability on that end. And so, things where, this is understanding, do you understand the difference of squares on here? And, you should solve for x minus y, which you should know is that x plus y times x minus y does equal x squared minus y squared. It's called the difference of squares. And so you do that, that's really just knowing that, that the x plus y quantity times x minus y equals 40. And if the x plus y equals 10, then x minus y equals 4. But I can see a student trying to like find out the values of x and y and try to make these work. could be pretty difficult on there. And then the essay is 30 minutes, so you get a little more time than the SSAT. The prompt is an open-ended question, like they like you. Two heads is better than one, or something like that. It's not scored. It's not the schools, same as SSAT. One of the things weird is that you have to write it in black or blue pen. You cannot write in pencil, which means you can't really erase. And so that's kind of a quirk of this test. So scoring is weird on the ISEE. It has this very strange scale of 760 to 940 for all sections. You do get a percentile score, and you do get a stand-on. And so a lot of schools are going to kind of prefer the stand-on score because it is essentially a simplified percentile. But what's important about it is that you might think a stand-on is just like counting in tens, but it's not. The stand-on of 9 is actually 96 to 99 percentile, where stand-on of 5 is like from 40 to 60 basically. So know that it's not like getting in the the 45th percentile would actually put you in the 5th stand-on. So testing timelines are really, really important for the ISEE. There are only 3 testing seasons. So there's fall, winter, and spring, summer. Spring, summer really isn't an option unless you're like waitlisted or something. So you need to get that first test in by fall, and then plan to have that second test in winter. So the SSAT, you can take the test a lot more, take it a lot more times. The ISEE, basically you have 2 tests in there. Again, there's no nationwide testing date, so you have to find schools that offer it, or find a prometric testing center. And so you have to be really strategic about a testing timeline for ISEE. Study plan, a lot of this is the same. Definitely, make sure like when you're testing, because you have to do that research for the ISEE. You can't just assume that there's going to be a test this month, because if you're in a region where there are few schools that offer use the ISEE, then there's few testing options for that. A lot of this is the same. One thing I was like, a student's going to have to do you have to spend less effort on vocabulary for the ISEE versus SSAT, but you're going to spend more time on math, and knowing that for students to do well, they may have to learn some of the basics of some ideas that they maybe didn't haven't learned in school, and it kind of push a little bit ahead. Honestly, in the mathematics achievement, they're kind of asking, do you know what SOHCAHTOA is, for trigonometry? It's not going to be super intense. So one thing to announce on here is that we finally have the Operath guide to the SSAT. I was the lead author on that, so I'm very excited about this. And we got that's for is available for students to work in and within tutoring on there. And we should launch a little quiz here. Little not quiz. What's the right word? A poll. There we go. Oh, no poll. Okay. Oh, we're not doing a poll day. All right. So sorry. Sometimes there are polls. All right. But yeah, if you think we love doing SSAT tutoring here. We have mock tests and ISEE tutoring as well. We have mock tests, and if it makes sense, please reach out. Program director would love to chat and make a plan for your student. So don't have too much time for question answer here, but a question I saw was asking about those cutoff scores for schools. And I think some schools will say that they expect a stand-on score of 6 or above, or 7 or above. But on the percentiles, they tend not to want to say that for the SSAT. Again, I think it's something where I think schools are it makes sense for the schools to be a little bit cagey, because they don't want to say, well, my student didn't get in, and my student had an 85th percentile. But this other student got in with the 70th percentile, but maybe there's a non-testing reason for that, right? Because maybe that the other kid is a star athlete, or parents donated a building or something. These other parts. So I know that can be kind of a like a frustration on there, but like you if you think about how a like how the school has like have to kind of protect themselves, and obviously don't want to like get them in for a frivolous lawsuit of why my student wasn't admitted or something, because people can be I recognize that this is a sensitive topic on there. I've also worked with a student who got 98th percentile and got rejected from a school, and that might well, that he needed a 99th percentile. I was like, no, the student had been like moving, like hopping schools, and they felt that it was better for him to stay in his current school, versus trying to go to a new school, more for like emotional social learning, because he had transferred like 3 schools in 5 years or something. So it wasn't a rejection over like intelligence or ability. It was a rejection over socially. This is going to be probably a better idea. So, well, all right. I appreciate you all hanging out with me and learning a little bit about these tests. And yeah, do reach out if you have any further questions there. It's been a fun one. Have a good night.